If you guys haven't heard by now, yeah, this is the Nick Frazier Podcast, and you're getting the best genuine content out there. Right, fellas?
It's true.
Agreed.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nick Frazier Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Frazier, as it says in the title. Today, I have on somebody that's been a well-known name in the Nashville sports market. Willy Daunic. How are you today, Willy?
I am doing well, Nick. Good to talk to you. I love the set of the Nick Frazier Podcast. I feel very welcome. When the light goes on, it's just very welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Willy. I appreciate it. You know, people have always asked me, well, where'd you get the sign? I was like, well, I got some really cool neighbors that, you know, they ended up helping me out with the set. And, you know, the table right here is actually handmade by my dad and I. You know, my uncle has a place out in Smyrna, and he had some cedar trees. And it's cool. You know, if you can see this in person, it looks like a bunch of pieces of uncooked bacon. And so I call it either the breakfast table or the bacon table, whatever. But it smells good. I'll tell you that much. Cedar tables smell quite nice.
Okay, good.
There we go. Well, cool deal. Well, Willy, reason why I want to have you on is one, I want to do a broadcaster series on the podcast, and people that know me for, you know, the Nick Frazier Podcast, and from either talking about Nashville sports or food talk or country music or whatever, just a conglomerate of all those. But I want to get into sports talk radio, especially with you, and just kind of how you got your foot in the door, kind of talk about, you know, what inspired you to go into that industry. Obviously, you started out with, you know, playing baseball, getting drafted to the Toronto Blue Jays back in, what, 93? Is that right?
Right. Correct.
Perfect. And then later on, you know, playing basketball at Vandy as well, baseball. And then, you know, where'd it go from there? Was that kind of your thought process of, oh, when I'm done with sports, I'm going to, you know, possibly get into sports broadcasting? Or because I believe in college, you were what, a history major, right?
I was. I did 0.0 broadcasting in college. Like you said, I was playing. I played two sports at Vanderbilt for 3 years, and then I just played baseball my senior year and was fortunate enough to get drafted. So I wanted to play. I was hoping to play forever, which nobody can. So at a certain point, I knew I wanted to be in sports in some capacity with my job. I just loved it too much. My dad was an athletic director, so I grew up on a college campus. I was always around it. So it really left broadcasting and coaching as probably the two things that I had an interest in. And it really could have gone either way once I was released by the Blue Jays. But I had been doing some sports talk part-time with George Plaster. It's been 30 years ago, which is pretty crazy to say. It sounds crazy to say 30 years, but he gave me a great break. And that's what I ended up doing. I was kind of at a crossroads. I could have taken a coaching job, but I chose broadcasting, and it's gone that way ever since. I just love being able to show up to work every day and love what you do. That's what everybody's goal, I think, should be. And if you can do that, I think you're going to have some happiness, and that I sure have. Yeah.
You know, there's a saying that goes, you know, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. I assume that's what you feel every day, don't you?
Oh, no question. No question. I always say, I mean, I think a lot of people have come up to me over the years and say, you know, how to get into it. I've heard some people, you know, maybe 5-10 years into their professional career that would like to start getting into it, but you kind of have to commit early if you're going to do this, because it's not always easy. And I've had the good fortune of having some people that have opened up some doors for me, because you do need a break. There's a lot of people that love to do it, but you have to be willing to work, and you have to be willing to start at the bottom for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, you know, some grunt work for sure. You know, I think the first time I wanted to really get into sports broadcasting, I was probably in the 6th grade. I do remember this vividly. It was English class. And my teacher goes, well, what do you want to be when you grow up type thing? I was like, you know, every kid in that age wants to be a professional athlete, especially if you're around sports all the time. I was like, oh man, I would love to play football or play soccer or whatever. And then, you know, when I go to the doctor around, I don't know, 8th grade or so, I just think in my head, like, oh, I should be able to grow some more, whatever. The doc tells me, oh, you'll be 6'1", 6'2", just like some of your relatives. Yeah. Ended up being like 5'5", soaking wet. And so that's when the thought process of, oh, maybe I want to get into sports broadcasting. That's the plan B. And so that's kind of what I want to get with you is that, you know, you mentioned George Plaster, and I've met George personally. He's a Very nice guy. I actually got to speak to him a handful of times at the Nashville soccer games. He goes every other, I don't know, couple weekends or so. But the first interaction I had with him was actually at a country music center downtown. And I think 1025 at the time was doing some sort of promotional thing. It's when they drafted Jack Conklin, and you were there. George was there. And I spoke to George, and he goes, "Well, is this what you want to do when you grow up?" I was like, "I would love to be in this industry." And his exact words, I'll never forget this. He goes, "Get the hell out." And I busted out laughing. It was the funniest thing. George cracked me up. And I assume you have a lot of those candid conversations with him as well.
Yeah, he and I have been reminiscing a lot about the beginning. He has used that line, by the way, on many people, but it's like a test. He wants to see, if you're really serious about it, because he loves it. There's no question about it. He's still going along at this stage of his career. He still loves doing what he's doing, for sure. But getting the start is such an important thing. When he hired me, his show was already starting to get some real good traction. The station we were at was in bankruptcy, and there weren't a lot of resources, but it had a good signal. This was 99.7, or it was bought by Gaylord Entertainment. It's been a long evolution since then. But in the early 90s, his show was starting to take off. The sports talk genre was a fairly new genre back then, but this was before, Twitter, podcasts like you're doing right now, satellite radio. And it was a great outlet for big audiences to collectively talk about what was going on. But he was the one that really got it going and had the ability to talk about a variety of things, hit on the hot topics of Nashville, I think, better than anybody had before. So he was getting an audience. So I was able to get in there on the ground floor of something he was really starting to build the foundation for. Then the next thing you know, about 2 or 3 years later, here come the Titans, here come the Predators, and then we went to a whole new level as a city when it came to sports.
How easy was that for either you or George working together? When you have the Preds and the Titans kind of at the cusp of the 97, 98 type years, was that an easy transition for you both, just to kind of get your feet wet in more of the hands-on aspect of covering sports here in the city?
It was a process for sure. I was going through a lot of, I think, a learning process for me, just learn how to be a quality broadcaster. I think he and I both, when you think about being a broadcaster, at least when I was growing up, and I think he would tell you the same thing, he always thought play-by-play was going to be the end game. You really didn't have sports talk on your mind at that point, because we hadn't grown up with a lot of sports talk around in every city. So it ended up just being the opportunity was there, and he made the most of it. He's an excellent play-by-play announcer as well, and he's taught me a lot in that area. And I still I obviously enjoy doing the play-by-play like I do today for the Preds. But the sports talk thing was really interesting. We spent a lot of time when the Titans were coming in, transitioning from talking, I would say 80%, 75 to 80% was SEC sports, football, and then college basketball. That was a huge chunk of what we would talk about. We would sprinkle in some baseball in there. And NFL really wasn't a big part of it. But over the first few years of the Titans, and then, you take 1999, when all of a sudden they exploded in the brand new stadium the first year they were called the Titans, that was a game changer. But we would have, our show was catching up. We had been talking college football every Monday for 2 hours, the first 2 hours of the show. And we came to the conclusion, you know what, we can't just do this. The Titans just played. Everybody wants to talk about the Titans. And so we had to adapt. And then the Predator thing was an even tougher adaptation, because how do you work that in? We didn't have a deep background in talking hockey. A lot of our listeners didn't really have the wherewithal and the desire to talk a lot of hockey, the ability. They were going to the games and having a great time, but we didn't know a whole lot about the game. So that's evolved huge over the years.
Yeah, that was one thing that kind of caught my ear. Growing up as a kid, listening to radio, and you mentioning, sports talk radio wasn't a big thing back then, and now it's evolved to something different. In that transition phase of when you got your feet wet in the industry and talking about the Titans and Preds, and then maybe some other stations along the way started doing replicating what you and George were doing. did that ever just kind of light a fire on you? Like, all right, it's time to step it up. Like, was that the next thing in your, I guess, career that really kind of took off for you? Is that, oh, we have to kind of step it up every other week? There's that competition right behind us.
Yeah. For a long time, we were fortunate that our show was established, had a good audience as the city grew. And for a long time, there weren't a whole lot of other shows that we were competing against. And like I said, today it's very fragmented, right? So Nick, you love the St. Louis Cardinals, right?
Yes, indeed.
You could go on your phone right now and probably find 3 or 4, even though they're not having a great year. Sorry to mention that. Hey, my Mets are right the same way with you guys.
We're in the same boat, Willie. We've talked about it ad nauseum for so long this year. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. But if we want to hear a podcast, we can find 2 or 3 or 4 podcasts on our phone and start listening. That was not an option back then. So it's a very fragmented audience. So you have to be really good today. You have a lot of competition. There are a couple. There's other radio stations in the market. There's satellite radio. There's all these podcasts that have specific things that they're talking about. Back then, it was much more. How do you capture the broad audience? And you had the ability to do that because there were less outlets for people to go. So I think we felt like, especially when things would happen, like the Titans would go to the Super Bowl or the NHL draft came to Nashville in 2003. I think there was a sense of pride too of, these other cities would bring people to Nashville and they wouldn't know much about what Nashville was about. So there was a little bit of pride saying, yeah, we're the guys you want to talk to when you come to Nashville and talk sports. So that was, I think, what you were saying, step it up, raise the bar. I think about that a lot. You wanted to represent Nashville well.
With Nashville, from what it's grown, from 97 up to now, it's just transitioned to something completely different, up to a whole nother level of Preds. We all saw when they went on the Cup run, Broadway was a sea of yellowy gold. Like, it was all over the place. And then with the Titans, and they're running 2017, 2019-ish era. The city, this is a sports city for sure. And so, getting back to the broadcasting aspect of it, when you would, rehearsing, not your lines, but like rehearsing the way you would, your inflection of your voice and stuff like that, did that ever become a challenge? I know you didn't go to school for broadcasting, but with George, I know you alluded to it a little bit. There was that transitional phase of like, maybe I do need to practice a little more. Was that ever a big challenge for you at all, getting into the industry?
It was a huge challenge. I thought I could do it. In my mind, I felt like I had something to offer in terms of knowledge of sports, my background. Back then, Vanderbilt athletics was really at the center of the sports discussion, right? Because all the SEC teams flowed through. It was the biggest sporting event in the city, and because I had played, not that I was a great player, but I still had a little bit of recognition because I was on some good teams, so people knew a little bit about me. And I feel like having some insight, having been through the league and knowing the coaches and things, that gave me something to offer. But the problem was I had never been on the air or anything. I thought I could just do it. And there are some people like Terry Crisp. I think it's some naturals. There are some people that just naturally can jump on and sound really good on the radio or in that setting. I was not one of them. And I realized that pretty quick. And so did George. And so he had to take me. It was like the fundamentals. He would sit down in a studio with me. We'd flip on a microphone. He would hand me wire copy or simply the sports page. And he would have me just start reading it. And I thought it was pretty awkward at the beginning. But then I realized, you have to practice sounding how a good broadcaster sounds. And so I was not a natural at all. So it took me probably 2 years. I think there were people early on where I was kind of finding my way on the air that were saying, George, this guy's got a long way to go. And so I'm really happy that he stuck with me. And it probably took me about 6 to 8 months to realize how much I needed to keep getting better in that area. So it was really about a 2-year process, I think, before I felt like I was starting to break through. And you always try to keep getting better.
Oh, absolutely. It's a craft that always has to be, refined every once in a while.
Yeah.
And with, the aspect of radio and play-by-play, like there had to be some sort of, happy medium to where, when you do play-by-play on TV, it's different because you're describing what people are seeing. Now, whereas for radio, you're a true storyteller at that point. Obviously, you started out with the Preds as a radio broadcaster, and then eventually now you're with Bally and you do TV broadcasting. Was there ever a transitional phase for you where you're like, maybe I have to say it differently for people on radio to really grasp the picture in their brain?
Radio is definitely different in that you do have to provide the visual. For example, for play-by-play specifically, right? You have to give the location of the puck. And I had done some baseball. I had done some basketball play-by-play on the radio, even a little bit of football here and there. And that is one lesson you learn early when you're being taught is on the radio, you have to give the location of where the ball, the puck, whatever is. And so that's an added layer where you can't slough on that, or else the listener just doesn't really know what's happening right there. So that's a tricky thing. And then when you go to TV, it's a little easier at adjustment because you don't have to give that, but you have to fill that gap with something. Sometimes not talking is the way to go on television, but you want to fill that gap rather than saying where the location is. You want to fill that with something that's important when you do open your mouth.
When you went to TV broadcast, you have a guy like Chris Mason, who obviously you, Hal Gill, Lindsey Riley, Kara Hammer, all the Bally group, you guys seem to have a really good chemistry and core. Obviously that helps out with being on the TV broadcast with them all, correct?
Yeah, the chemistry is very, very important. I think we go through a lot of detail on what a good broadcast entails. What are the ingredients? Just like when you're putting a recipe together, you got your ingredients. But I think the number one ingredient that is very basic, but it's number one always, is just, do people like watching the game with you? You want to have that feeling of people enjoying watching the game with the people that are doing the broadcast. If they don't like you, and it's a tricky thing sometimes, then they're more apt to turn it off. If it's a great game, people probably at the end of the day don't care who the announcers are. But if there's those games that maybe don't have huge significance, maybe the broadcaster can keep you around a little bit longer if people enjoy watching the games with you. So that's a basic thing, but it's a very important thing.
Well, I mean, hey, you've been around since day one for the most part. I think you've solidified your spot there, wouldn't you say?
Well, I hope so. One of the things that we have found over the years, we know with the second generation of Predator fans, how much people enjoyed just listening and watching Pete Weber and Terry Crisp, right? They're just enjoyable guys to be around. They're excellent broadcasters, and that's important too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you gotta know how to call it. I've learned a ton of how to call hockey from Pete, no question about it. But what they had above all else is just that rapport of, hey, look, just kick back and watch the game with us. Even if you don't know exactly what's happening, and a lot of people didn't know a whole lot those early years, they enjoyed watching and just taking in the games with those two guys. So I take that to heart. I think about that a lot. Mason and I know we go into every game, we want to have, we call it passion. We want to have a lot of it. And that's, that's really a Crispyism, bring the passion. That's Crispy's line, right? So we want to bring that passion and enthusiasm to every broadcast.
You ever pick Pete Weber's brain from time to time when it comes to, play-by-play on TV? Because, he started out with TV play-by-play, and now you guys have kind of switched roles for the most part. You ever pick his brain? There's something out there that, might need to be refined here or there?
Oh, many times. He's always available for that type of thing. I used to do it a lot more when I was younger. I found myself a lot, though, just sort of sitting back and absorbing and watching how they did what they did. Some of the fundamentals and terms that Pete uses, where he's so efficient on how he calls the game. Those are little things that you pick up. You never want to flat out copy 100% any broadcaster, right? I love the classic broadcasters that I grew up that did the big games, Al Michaels and Vince Scully and Bob Costas, Keith Jackson. I love listening. I love even going back to old games that they do. And you pick up little things. It's like you were saying before we were talking about the process of how it sounds. It's almost like a good song, a good music what does it sound like? What are some little things you can pick up? You're not copying any. You don't want to ever have anybody say, but he's trying to sound like so and so. That would not be good. Nobody can sound like the great guys. Take Mike Emmerich, right? The widely considered the most famous hockey announcer. Nobody could ever be like him. But you can pick up little things from every broadcaster that you're like, hey, that's something I want to put in my little toolbox here, and maybe pull that out in some form or fashion. That's a good fundamental.
When you got into hockey, specifically with play-by-play, was it a preference that you would like to, do hockey play-by-play rather than any other sport, or how did that come about?
Definitely something that happened simply because the Predators happened to come to town. If there were a baseball team or a basketball team, I think I might have moved in that direction. But hockey was not something I had played much growing up. I did grow up in New York. And so I had watched a lot of NHL. I was in New York when the Miracle on Ice of 1980 happened. The New York Islanders had an unbelievable team that won 4 consecutive Stanley Cups. The New York Rangers were really popular. So this was before cable TV. So there were a couple of sports channels, a couple of just regular channels in New York. But because there's so many teams in New York, there were a lot of games on. So there were hockey games on. And we only had about 8 channels before the days of cable. So I was just a sports nut. If there was a basketball game on, if it was the Knicks, I'd watch the Knicks. The next night, it could be the Rangers. I was watching the Rangers. So I had a little bit of knowledge of the New York teams in hockey. And then when I moved to Florida, I lost connection with the game. So I never did any sports broadcasting of hockey whatsoever. But I saw when the team came here, I was like, you know what? I love play-by-play. I was doing play-by-play in other things. I was on the Vanderbilt Radio Network doing some stuff. I was doing some freelance arena football games or whatever opportunity I could find to do, I would do it. High school games. But I was like, I want to learn how to do play-by-play in hockey. So I would practice on my own. Like I said, I would listen to Pete and Terry a lot. And then I would miserably fail sitting up in, say, a preseason game with a microphone where nobody could hear me, thankfully, and it wasn't going out on the air. But you could, through trial and error and through practice, start to weed through the mistakes. And I got to the point where they were confident enough in me that I could be sort of the utility man. I could step in if there was ever a game where they needed somebody. And it kind of evolved from there.
Interesting. That is pretty neat. That's one thing when I was a kid, I've always wanted to do either a play-by-play or sports talk radio. I mean, the ultimate goal is, what you're doing is sports talk radio during the day, Preds at night. I mean, you got the 1-2 combo there, Willy. It's like, why leave what you have here, and do something else? You ever get, attracted to any other market? I mean, even though you were set in stone here in Nashville and still are, were you ever attracted to any other market in your career?
Not really. I was surprised. Like when I came to Vanderbilt, I'll never forget. He's now the athletic director at Trevecca. His name is Mark Elliott. He had played 2 sports at Vanderbilt. So he and I had that bond from the very start. He was an assistant coach for Eddie Fogler. And he was telling me how many of the players ended up staying in Nashville after they went to school. And I had never even thought about that. I was thinking Nashville, I'm not a country music person. This was, in the 90s or whatever. I was like, I just don't see myself staying here. But by the time I had graduated, it became a very obviously the option, right? And then once I get going, because I had a really good opportunity early, I really haven't found myself looking around too much. The opportunities have come over time here, and I've just watched the city as a sports city grow so much. I really haven't looked outside Nashville very much.
Exactly. With sports broadcasting specifically, and getting the grasp of learning hockey and the learning curves there, what was your big, I guess, on the midday show with Caroline, Willy, and D-Mace, you guys have asked Derek before about what was your big NFL, welcome to the NFL moment? Recently, you guys asked that. What was your biggest, I guess, welcome to the show moment in sports broadcasting?
In sports broadcasting, well, there were definitely a couple. What you learn early is when you're on live radio every day, you are going to screw some stuff up. You're going to sound bad, or you're going to say something that's completely wrong. There was a moment early on where we were interviewing Dan Reeves, who was a heck of a coach. He was a great player in the league for a long time. Then he coached forever. He was John Elway's coach for the Broncos during the 80s. And then in the 90s, he was coaching the Falcons. And we had him on as the coach of the Falcons. And it was before the season started. And I asked him about his quarterback, Elvis Grbac. And the problem was he didn't have Elvis Grbac on his team. I was getting him confused with Chris Chandler, another quarterback. And man, you want to talk about, luckily, people couldn't see my face. We didn't Zoom the show like we do now.
Yeah.
I turned beet red. And George and the late Joe Biddle, who was on the show, they just looked at me like, what is your problem? We have an NFL legend on the air, and you're asking about his quarterback that's the wrong guy. So you're going to screw up a few times. And so you learn that you just have to sort of go with that. It's going to happen a few times, and hopefully it doesn't happen very often.
Everybody has a hiccup every once in a while, but when you're on the air from time to time, just now that you've done it for 30 years, and by the way, back in January, you were, I guess nominated, and you ended up winning the NSMA Broadcaster of the Year award. What was that like for you to know that your prolonged career here in Nashville, it's finally I wouldn't say finally, but is come to the point where you're winning awards, and is it a very gratifying feeling for the most part?
It's nice to be recognized. I think anybody, like we talked about early on, you broadcast because you just love to do it, right? Because it beats working, that old saying. But it is nice to be recognized by your peers. And I shared the award with Pete Weber, who's won it I don't know how many times now. He's probably double digits at this point. But, to win it along with him was extra special to me because of how much I've learned from him. So that was really cool. I didn't know how much it would mean to me. And when they called and did it, it just kind of sunk in. It was a very good feeling. Yep, that's one I'll file away. I mean, like I was saying, like you get into, when you start playing sports, you play to win. You play to win championships. It's not quite like that in radio, right, or broadcasting. You want to be successful, and you want that feeling. And obviously, ratings are important, and you got to do the job. But It's not like you're necessarily competing in the same fashion. And so you don't compete to win the Broadcaster of the Year award, but it is at the same time very nice to get recognized.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I'm going to get to talking with you here before we get to our final segment with Meals and Meatball is, when you go, and I'm trying to think if it's either hockey or baseball or whatever, what would be your bucket list thing as a sports broadcaster you haven't broadcasted yet that you would like to in the future?
Well, the Stanley Cup final would be something I would love to get to that because that was so amazing, being able to be around it like we did before. That would be cool. I would love to do a Major League Baseball game just because I'm such a baseball junkie. Always have been. It's a completely different game to call, baseball as opposed to hockey. They're very, very different. They're probably on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Your basketball, probably a little more like hockey. Football is a little closer to baseball, where the game stops and starts. Basketball, there's a lot more flow. Hockey, there's almost continuous flow, right? So it's a different call. But I do really enjoy calling baseball. I've had a chance to do some Vanderbilt over the years. I filled in for Jeff Hem the odd time or two over at the Sounds Park. That's always a big thrill to do. So a Major League Baseball game someday, that would be a trip. 162 per year, man. I admire those guys that go through that year after year, playing a game every day. That's because as a baseball player in the minor leagues, that's what you learn when you start playing minor league baseball. That grind of every day, it really tests how much you love the game. But man, I do love baseball, and that would be fun to do someday, a big league ball game.
Any team in particular, any franchise you'd like to?
I would take whoever wants me. That would be the case. But I am a Mets fan, as you know, so I'm watching those guys all the time. And I think I know enough Mets history that I wouldn't be completely out of place if you dropped me in there for one day. But I'm sure there'd be a lot of New Yorkers going, "Who is this? Who is this guy?" You know, you got to earn your stripes.
Practicing any home run calls at home? You ever just practice any home run calls out of the blue?
You know, you do. I don't have anything wacky. You know, that's the thing. There's only so many ways you can call a home run. It is interesting. You hear 30 announcers do it. They've all got some similar traits, you know, to the track, to the wall. It's got, you know, there's not too much flair you can do. That's why it's such an art form, I think, is to do something distinctive, have the right amount of enthusiasm, have the right amount of, you know, not being too corny, but maybe have your own little touch that you put on it. These are all questions that I ask myself all the time when I watch other broadcasters. But sometimes it just is a gut feeling. Did that sound good or did not sound good?
Is there anything you want to cover before we get to the final segment, Willie? Is there anything that I may have missed or, you know, briefly jotted over?
Well, okay. Well, who's the next guest on the podcast? That's the question. I mean, I'm setting the bar pretty low. I feel like who do we need to get? Who's the next target?
I don't know, Willie. I mean, it's difficult. I maybe George. I don't know. I've talked to George about this a few times.
You got to get Plaz. Have you had Pete yet?
I haven't. Pete is on the bucket list, man. I would love to. You know, I've seen his Twitter a lot.
You definitely have to get those two for sure.
Yeah, I've seen Pete's Twitter a lot, and he's from Illinois, and I assume he's a big Cardinals fan. I've talked to him about it. He's
huge
Cardinals fan. So, there's some sort of a connection there. So I'll have to definitely get Pete on. That'd be.
Oh yeah, okay. Put him down. Put both of those guys down. Those are your next two.
There we go. All right, folks. Well, we are going to get into the last segment. Final segment called Meals with Meatball. We'll get Willie's reactions and his list of Tennessee Tasties and Nashville Nasties coming up next. Let me tell you about my friends over at SeatGeek. Yes, SeatGeek is a ticket company app I'd like to tell you about where you could buy any type of ticket on the market, concert, college football, NFL, hockey, basketball, whatever sporting event is in North America. By all means, go to it. You'll have a blast. But you're probably thinking, how am I supposed to go to a game when the ticket prices are so expensive? Well, you can use my code NFPOD, NFPOD, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Yes, $20 off. Isn't that crazy? Ticket prices are pretty expensive nowadays, but the best part about SeatGeek is that they have a ticket scale from 1 to 10. 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. You know what? Enjoy a nice night in the town, courtesy of the Nick Frazier Podcast. Use the code NFPOD, NFPOD for $20 off your first purchase. Yeah, it's time for Meals with Meatball. Everybody knows there are two lists. Willie, welcome to the very, I guess, famous, segment to the Nick Frazier Podcast of Meals with Meatball. A lot of the people that I get good response from it, they're just like, oh, man, I'm going to go try this place in Nashville. Or I was in Indiana the other week and so-and-so said this restaurant. It was really good. So either you're going to have some good places for the listeners to eat or they may or may not like it. I don't know. But yeah, two lists, Tennessee Tasties, Nashville Nasties. The thing is, you give me 3 places you like to eat either in Tennessee and or Nashville. And since you're on the road a lot with the Preds, I'll give you a little celebrity pick if you want. And Nashville Nasties is just, a terrible experience you had at a restaurant here in the city or somewhere in the U.S.
I'm ready.
Floor is yours. Give me your Tennessee Tasties.
Okay, the Tennessee Tasties. First of all, a moment of silence for a retired restaurant that's no longer. It still lives in a form, but Rotier's used to be the great go-to spot right off of the Vanderbilt campus that no longer is there. This is the growth of the city. It's the good and the bad of a city growing. You lose some places like that. They still have a Rotier's, I think, at the airport. So not quite the same as because the old setting was the key. But in that same vein, I'm going to go with the Elliston Place Soda Shop as a good old school place that's been around for a long, long time. I love going. Just brings you back. It's just got great nostalgia. Still got the great milkshakes. I love going to Elliston Place Soda Shop for that type. On the east side, I'm going to give you 5 Points Pizza, which is my favorite. It's really, really good. They got the garlic knots. You can sit down, but it's a great takeout place. There's always a line in 5 Points of people waiting to pick up their pizza from 5 Points. So it's a big one for sure.
Okay.
And then the third one is another one that's sort of relocated to the east side, Jane's Hideaway. If you want a place that has good live music, They used to be, I think, in Printer's Alley, and now they've kind of repositioned themselves. It looks the same, and it's a real kind of hole in the wall place along Gallatin Road. But great food, great service, and they have great talent, and they've got the right noise level, right? You know, the music can be playing, but you can still have a conversation while you're eating dinner and enjoy it. So it's really cool. It's like it's supposed to be downtown, but it's not. So if you're looking for a place that has that same kind of flavor, but it's not quite as crazy in the middle of the chaotic downtown, that's a good spot.
Okay. Those are some good recommendations there, Willie.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I was probably about 4 or 5. My parents both would take me to the Elson Soda Shop all the time, man. It was
okay.
The milkshakes, you're right. Can't go wrong there. You really can't. Between that and Gabby's Burgers, I don't know if you've had Gabby's Burgers milkshakes or not.
Thumbs
They're
up
to die
Thumbs up
for.
Gabby's Burgers, for sure.
Yeah. Honestly, when you walk through those doors at Gabby's Burgers, it's like you're actually walking back into, I don't know. My grandparents had wood paneling for their wall, and it just reminds me a lot of that because they have that over at Gabby's Burgers. Like, I feel like I'm walking into a 1978 house that was just bought about 5 weeks ago. So those are your Tennessee Tasties. You have a celebrity pick because you're on the road a lot with the Preds?
I'm gonna pick out one that always seems to give us some fun stories. And when we go and play, you know, we don't always stay at the same place when we go to the road, but we have some go-to spots, so we know the surrounding area. So if we're playing both Southern California teams, the Kings and the Ducks, oftentimes we'll stay in a place where you can get to both fairly easily. And so it's in Santa Monica, which is an unbelievable spot. If you're going to be there for a couple of days, if there's a day or two between games, I highly recommend it. You can go to the beach. You can walk up and down and see all the crazy people at Venice Beach lifting weights on the beach. You can jump into a pickup basketball game. You can find pickleball. There's all kinds of stuff. But also they have this place called Chez J, which is literally a shack along the road. It's across the street from the road that you can walk down to the shoreline and go to the beach. But it's got all these pictures of these celebrities going back to like Frank Sinatra and like Marilyn Monroe and people that have been in there. So it's really got flavor. It's got character. It's been through the battles. You know, it looks like you're like, how is this place still standing? It's so tiny. You walk in there and there's this big, it looks like something from Gilligan's Island. The wheel, the ship wheel. What do you call it? You can actually give it a spin when you walk in there.
Yeah.
But it's called Chez J. So
okay.
A lot of flavor, a lot of character. So we always
any recommended dishes out of any of the places you recommended?
Well, I would say the garlic knots at 5 Points definitely worth doing. Any of if you like the New York style pizza, that's 5 Points pizza. You know, some people might be partial to the Chicago style or other stuff, but it's pretty much straight up New York pizza. But it's got its own little nuances that they do, and so I like them all. So it's very good. And they also have the calzones at 5 Points Pizza. So if you're into that, they got a stromboli. The Zeus stromboli is one of my go-tos. A lot of vegetables.
That's right up my alley, Willie.
Yeah, I'm liking it.
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to think. There was a place some family friends of ours had here in Nashville. It's called Joey's House of Pizza. They ended up not closing, but I think they should do takeout now. But their relatives, I think brother, somewhere down the line. It was down there in the old game center downtown. It was called Manny's House of Pizza. I'm not familiar about it.
I don't think maybe I've been to that. I'm not sure.
But it's over in the old game center alley. And it's damn good pizza. And now I think they've closed their doors due to the fact that I think they're going to revamp that little area. But hopefully they reopen. But yeah, I'm right there with you. A calzone, some stromboli. You can't go wrong. That stuff is it's a staple point in cuisine and in today's day and age, especially if, you know, trying to enjoy a nice night in the town, you know?
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
Willie, give me the worst of it all. Give me your Nashville Nasty or National Nasty. Just give it to me. Everybody loves to hear these.
It's really not the restaurant's fault, but what came to mind for me, I asked Aaron, who you've met, right? Aaron is a vegetarian, my wife. And so, especially at the beginning of our relationship, you know, I had to be careful of having meat. I still eat meat. My kids were raised vegetarian. My son Mahoney, he's a pescatarian now, so he's way into fish. But so we always have to go to places that have good vegetarian options. But if I wanted to have meat, I had to, try to learn as we're dating. It's got to be subtle. But I learned the hard way because we were in Cookeville. We went to a good Mexican restaurant, and I ordered fajitas. And when they on the menu say sizzling fajitas, they meant sizzling fajitas. So they bring that thing out of the kitchen, and it is smoldering. It has got smoke. It smells great if you're me, but it didn't smell great if you're Aaron. And so, a good Mexican restaurant, you can walk out of there and your clothes kind of smell like the Mexican restaurant.
Like you just got out of the kitchen.
Not necessarily a bad thing if you enjoyed the meal, but if you're with your date's vegetarian, it doesn't go over so hot. So needless to say, that was a little bit awkward when those fajitas came out of the kitchen.
But they were good though, right?
They were good, but I can't say I really enjoyed the meal a whole lot. There was a little bit of guilt going on there.
Hey, it happens. It happens. Well, is there any other tidbits you want to add to the Meals and Meatball segment?
Well, I like the segment. I think we need to, I need to keep working on this. We might have to bring this to the airwaves on 102.5 The Game. This could be good.
Just might. Hey, Meals and Meatball.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give you a little backstory to this, Willie. I don't know if I ever told you this or not, but the reason why I named it Meals and Meatball, so when I was in high school, I played football and also played soccer. So when I played football in the fall, obviously I had a lot of extra weight on me. I weighed probably around 165, 170-ish. And, I had to beef up for football so I wouldn't get hurt. And so then when I got back to soccer, I wouldn't say I was out of shape. I just had all this excess weight on me. So every time I'd go for the ball and just open field, I wouldn't say accidentally. I just didn't know how strong I was. And I'd bump somebody off and they go flying down into the field. I'm like, sorry. So then my coaches, they ended up calling me Wrecking Ball initially. I was like, yeah, Wrecking Ball. It just sounds aggressive. I don't mind it, but it just sounds aggressive. And so one of my coaches found out that I was Italian, and he goes, "Oh, we're calling him Meatball now." I was like, "Oh, gee, thanks, guys, I appreciate it." So ever since then, I thought Wrecking Ball was okay. But then they made a Miley Cyrus reference, and I was fine with it. They're like, it just doesn't stick right. I was like, okay. I mean, whatever you guys want. I mean, nicknames that come natural. So I wasn't picky about it. I don't care. People call me Meatball. Some people call me Nick, whatever. When I worked in, grade schools, I was an aftercare teacher, and all the kids would do summer camps. And then I did a summer camp down the street from where I worked. And so some of those kids from that school would go to the summer camp. Well, some of my friends that I went to high school with worked with me in that summer camp, and they called me Meatball, and some of the kids caught on about it. So they started calling me Mr. Meatball. I was like, oh, no, this is not going to age well. And went back that next fall to the school I was at. And sure enough, 30, 40 kids in one sitting started calling me Meatball. And it's stuck ever since. So a friend of mine made a fanny pack, and it's a pizza slice, and it says Meatball on the front of it. So, yeah. That's kind of how this segment came to what it is today.
Okay, well, good. That's the moral of the story is unless you're Deion Sanders, usually you can't nickname yourself, right? It's whatever.
Exactly, right? Unless you're prime time, that's the only way.
Yeah.
Cool deal. Well, Willie, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. Greatly appreciate you coming on. We're going to have you on again eventually. You got to have a little spaced in time, I'll
be ready, and we'll have more restaurants to share. No question.
There we go.
The East
Perfect.
Side.
Willie, I'll give you the last word here. Give the people, the listeners and viewers, where they can find you, where they can find your work, and so forth.
Well, we're going to be cranking it up on 102.5 The Game with you as our awesome producer. At 11 to 2 every weekday. So Monday will be a big day after the Titans' first game. And just every weekday with D. Mace, Caroline Fenton on 102.5 The Game. I'm on Twitter at WillyD1025. And, of course, we'll be cracking up the Preds here very soon. In a couple weeks, training camp will get going. So we're looking forward to it.
There we go. September Willie, everybody. Willy Daunic.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, man. Well, Willie, thank you again. Appreciate it. And we'll see you down the road.
All right. Thanks, Nick.